Have you ever sat in a class and wondered, why are we learning this? Or why your school day is structured the way it is? Well, the answer isn't random. It's all part of a huge, often invisible blueprint that shapes our entire education system. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what's called education policy. So who's actually calling the shots? Who decides what subjects make the cut, how teachers get trained, or even how long summer vacation is? Yeah, your principal and local school board have a say, for sure. But the real story, the big decisions, they happen at a much, much higher level. And it all comes down to this one big concept: education policy. You can think of it as the operating system for our schools. It's the master plan that influences everything from the history books in your backpack to the final exams you take. Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly is this powerful framework? What do we really mean when we talk about education policy? At its most basic, education policy is the official rulebook. It's the collection of laws, the big picture strategies, and the day-to-day decisions that guide how everything from preschool to grad school actually works. To put it really simply, policy is all about answering three massive questions. First, what's our vision? What kind of education system are we even trying to build? Second, what's the goal? What do we want students to know and be able to do when they graduate? And third, what's the plan? How do we organize everything to actually make that happen? It's the destination and the roadmap. And trust me, this goes way beyond just what happens in the classroom. We're talking about how schools are funded, how teachers get certified, how students are tested. It even gets into a country's core values. Take Malaysia, for instance. Their national education philosophy is baked right into their policy with the goal of developing students who are balanced intellectually, spiritually, and physically. But, why go through all this trouble? Why can't we just let schools figure it out on their own? Why is having a big official plan so important? Well, because without a solid plan, things can get really inconsistent and, frankly, unfair. A good policy is what ensures that a kid in one town gets the same quality of education as a kid in another. It's about making sure the whole system is fair, that it supports the economy, and that it actually prepares everyone for the future. So, how does a new idea, like, say, a plan to boost reading skills, actually become a nationwide rule that every school has to follow? What's that journey look like? It's definitely not as simple as someone just snapping their fingers. There's a whole process involved, and people usually call it the policy cycle. A good way to think about it is a journey with 6 major stops along the way. So let's trace the path. First, somebody has to identify a problem, right? Like, hey, reading scores are down. Then it has to get on the government's to-do list, what's called agenda setting. After that, people brainstorm and debate solutions. That's policy formulation. Eventually, one of those solutions gets officially adopted and becomes law. Then comes the really hard part, implementing it in thousands of different schools. And finally, you have to check if it even worked. That's evaluation. Did the reading scores actually go up? Now, I gotta say, that's the neat textbook version. The real world, it's a lot messier. Policymaking can jump back and forth between stages. It gets influenced by politics, budget cuts, public opinion. It's less like a straight road and more like a winding, tangled path. So that begs the question, if it's not always this perfect logical process, then what's really going on behind the scenes? How are these huge decisions actually made? There are a couple of ways to look at it. One is the rational model, where you imagine policymakers carefully weighing all the evidence and picking the absolute best, most logical solution. But what happens more often is something called incrementalism. Think of it this way. Instead of creating a brand new revolutionary dinner plan, you just open the fridge and add a little hot sauce to last night's leftovers. It's a small, practical adjustment, not a complete overhaul. So when do the big radical changes happen? Well, there's a really cool theory called the policy window. It says that for a huge change to occur, 3 different streams have to converge at the exact same time. Everyone has to agree there's a major problem, there has to be a viable solution ready to go, and the political timing has to be just right. When those 3 things align, boom, a window of opportunity opens. Think about the massive push for science and tech education in the US right after the Soviets launched Sputnik. That was a policy window bursting wide open. All right, let's take all this theory and see how it actually plays out on the ground. Because what a country decides to focus on in its education policy tells you a whole lot about that country. You can really see how a country's policy reflects its reality. In many developing nations, the number one priority is just getting every kid in a classroom and making sure they learn to read. It's all about access and the basics. But in more developed countries, the conversation might be more about improving quality, bringing in new technology, and fostering innovation. And to see how this all comes together in one place, Malaysia's stories is a fantastic real-world example of a country using education policy to literally shape its own future. You can actually trace their journey through these key milestones. It really kicked off back in '56 with a foundational report. Then they passed major education acts over the decades to keep modernizing. And that all leads to their current super ambitious plan, the Malaysia Education Blueprint, which runs all the way to 2025. And this blueprint is the perfect example of a comprehensive policy. It's not just tinkering with one or two things. It's a massive, system-wide effort to boost teacher quality, empower principals, embrace digital tools, and just make the whole system run better. So, if you remember just one thing, let it be this. Education policy isn't just boring paperwork. It's the deliberate, systematic way that a nation invests in its people. It is the architectural plan for how entire generations will learn, work, and grow. Which brings us to a final, really important question to think about. If this process is so crucial for a country's future, who should actually be at the table when these plans are being made? What's the best way to make sure the voices of the people on the front lines, the teachers, the parents, and maybe even the students are heard?